The crimson sun cast long shadows across the dusty trail as Lillian James fought to stay conscious. Blood trickled down her temple, her tattered dress caked with dirt, and the remnants of her family's wagon lay splintered around her. The year was 1876, and the promise of California gold had turned to tragedy on this desolate stretch of Nevada territory. She had been traveling for weeks from Missouri with her older brother when bandits attacked. They'd taken everything: the horses, supplies, what little money they had, and left her brother dead in the dirt. Lillian had managed to crawl beneath the overturned wagon before passing out. Now, as consciousness returned in waves, she realized she might die here, miles from civilization. The distant thunder of hoofbeats barely registered until they grew louder, stopping abruptly nearby. Through swollen eyes, she glimpsed boots approaching, worn leather against the hard, packed earth. "Good Lord," a deep voice muttered. "Miss, can you hear me?" Strong but gentle hands turned her over, and Lillian found herself looking into the most startlingly blue eyes she'd ever seen. They belonged to a man with sun-bronzed skin and a concerned expression beneath his wide-brimmed hat. "Please," she whispered, her throat painfully dry. "Help me." "I've got you," he assured her, cradling her head as he offered his canteen. "My name's Thomas O'Malley. I've got a ranch about 5 miles east of here." As she sipped the water gratefully, he surveyed the wreckage with a grim expression. "Bandits?" he asked, though it wasn't really a question. Lillian nodded weakly, tears welling. "My brother." Thomas glanced around, spotting a body some distance away. His jaw tightened as he returned his attention to her. "What's your name, Miss Lillian James?" she managed. "We were headed to Placerville, California." Thomas nodded, his expression softening. "Well, Miss James, you're not going to die out here today. I'll get you patched up." He gestured to the splintered wagon. "I'll mend more than wood, I promise you that." She wasn't sure if it was his confident tone or sheer desperation, but something in his words kindled a flicker of hope. As he lifted her onto his horse with surprising gentleness for such a formidable man, Lillian allowed herself to believe she might survive after all. Thomas secured her in front of him on the saddle, one strong arm wrapped around her waist as they rode. The rhythm of the horse's gait and her injuries soon lulled Lillian back into unconsciousness. She awoke to the smell of coffee and the crackle of a fire. Night had fallen, and Thomas had made camp beneath an outcropping of rocks. He sat nearby, whittling a piece of wood with practiced motions. "You're awake," he observed, setting aside his project and reaching for a pot near the fire. "Figured we'd rest here tonight." "My ranch is still a few hours' ride, and you needed tending." Lillian attempted to sit up but winced at the pain that shot through her ribs. "Easy now," Thomas cautioned, moving to help her. "You've got some pretty bad bruising. I wrapped your ribs while you were out, hope you don't mind." It seemed necessary. Her face flushed at the thought, but she nodded. "Thank you." He handed her a tin cup of broth. "It's not much, but it'll help get your strength back." As she sipped, Lillian studied him openly for the first time. He was younger than she'd first thought, perhaps 30, with a strong jawline softened by a neatly trimmed beard. His features were weathered from years under the western sun, but there was a kindness in his eyes that belied his rugged appearance. "My brother," she said finally. "Did you?" "I buried him proper before we left," Thomas replied quietly. "Said some words over him. I'm sorry, Miss James. Truly." Tears spilled down her cheeks. James had been her only family after their parents died 2 years ago. At 22, Lillian was now completely alone in the world. "He was all I had," she whispered. Thomas didn't offer empty platitudes, just a respectful silence as she grieved. When her tears subsided, he passed her a handkerchief. "We should reach my place by midday tomorrow," he said. "You can stay until you're healed up. Then we can figure out your next steps." "Why are you helping me?" she asked, suddenly wary. Her experiences had taught her that kindness from strangers often came with expectations. Thomas seemed to understand her concern. "My ma raised me to help folks in need. Out here, that's sometimes all that stands between living and dying." He poked at the fire. "Besides, I know something about losing family to violence." There was a story there, but Lillian didn't press. Instead, she murmured, "Thank you, Mr. O'Malley." "Thomas," he corrected with a slight smile. "Mr. O'Malley was my father." "Thomas," she repeated, finding comfort in the simple exchange. They fell into a companionable silence as the desert night enveloped them, stars blazing overhead. Despite her grief and pain, Lillian felt oddly safe in this stranger's presence, the first moment of peace she'd known in weeks. Morning came with pink gold lights streaming across the landscape. Thomas had already packed up camp and was saddling his horse when Lillian awoke. "How are you feeling?" he asked, offering her a tin cup of coffee. "Like I was trampled by a herd of cattle," she admitted, accepting the cup gratefully. "But alive, thanks to you." Thomas nodded. "We should get going. Storm brewing in those mountains, and I'd rather not get caught in it." The ride to Thomas's ranch was arduous. Every jolt sent pain through Lillian's battered body, but she gritted her teeth against it. The landscape gradually changed from barren scrubland to rolling hills dotted with juniper and pine. Finally, they crested a rise, and Thomas's ranch came into view. "Welcome to the Lazy T," he said, a note of pride in his voice. It wasn't grand, but it was substantial, a sturdy log house with a wide porch, several outbuildings, a corral with a few horses, and cattle grazing on the surrounding grassland. Smoke curled from the chimney, suggesting someone was home. "You don't live alone?" Lillian asked, suddenly apprehensive. "My foreman's wife Rosa keeps house," Thomas explained. "They have quarters behind the main house. There's also a couple of ranch hands who bunk in the bunkhouse, but they're good men." As they approached, a plump Mexican woman emerged from the house, wiping her hands on her apron. Her expression shifted from welcome to concern when she spotted Lillian. "Dios mío, Thomas. What have you brought home now?" she called, hurrying down the steps. "Bandits hit her wagon," Thomas explained as he carefully helped Lillian dismount. "Her brother didn't make it." Rosa's face softened with compassion. "Pobrecita, come inside quickly now." What followed was a blur of warm water, clean clothes, and Rosa's gentle but efficient ministrations. The older woman clucked and murmured in Spanish as she tended to Lillian's injuries, shooing Thomas out of the room with firm instructions to make himself useful elsewhere. "That man," Rosa said fondly once they were alone, "he collects strays like some collect stamps. Animals, people, if they're hurt or lost, somehow they find Thomas O'Malley. He seems very kind," Lillian ventured. Rosa nodded. "The kindest, but sad too. Lost his wife and baby girl to fever 6 years back. Hasn't been the same since." She paused in wrapping Lillian's ribs. "But enough of old Rosa's gossip. You need rest, señorita." The room Rosa settled her in was simple but comfortable, a real bed with clean linens, a washstand with a pitcher and bowl, a small dresser, and a rocking chair near the window. Exhaustion overcame Lillian as soon as her head touched the pillow, and she fell into a deep, dreamless sleep. She awoke disoriented, golden afternoon light slanting through the window. For a moment, panic seized her. Where was James? Then reality crashed back, bringing fresh waves of grief. Her brother was dead, and she was in a stranger's home, dependent on charity. A soft knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. "Miss James, are you awake?" Thomas's voice came through the wood. "Yes," she called, hastily wiping her eyes. "Please come in." He entered cautiously, carrying a tray with a steaming bowl of stew, bread, and a cup of tea. "Rosa insisted you needed feeding," he explained, placing the tray on the small table beside the bed. "How are you feeling?" "Better, thank you," Lillian said, although the ache in her heart belied her words. "Mr. O'Malley, Thomas, I don't know how to repay your kindness, but I won't impose for long. Once I'm able, I can continue to Placerville." Thomas frowned. "And do what exactly, if you don't mind my asking?" The question stung because she had no good answer. James had been the one with the plan, the contacts, the dream of striking it rich in the gold country. Lillian had simply followed as she always had. I'm not sure," she admitted. "Find work, I suppose. I can sew, keep accounts, teach children. Surely there's need for that." Thomas nodded thoughtfully. "No doubt, but there's no rush, Miss James. Winter's coming on, and the pass to California won't be safe much longer anyway. You're welcome to stay here until spring if you wish." "I couldn't possibly." "You could," he interrupted gently. "In fact, Rosa would be mighty pleased to have another woman around. She's been saying for years the place needs a feminine touch." Lillian studied him, trying to discern his motives. Despite her wariness, she saw only genuine concern in his expression. "Why would you do this for a stranger?" she asked again. Thomas was quiet for a long moment. "Maybe I'm tired of being surrounded by just men and cattle," he said finally, with a small smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Or maybe I know what it's like to have your future ripped away in an instant." The weight of his words hung between them, hinting at the loss Rosa had mentioned. Before Lillian could respond, he stood. Think about it. No need to decide now, just focus on healing. He paused at the door. Oh, and I salvaged some of your things from the wagon. They're in that trunk by the wall. Not much, but it's something. With that, he left her to her meal and her thoughts. The days that followed established a routine. Lillian's strength returned gradually under Rosa's care and hearty cooking. She began helping with light household tasks, finding comfort in the routine of domestic work. Thomas was often gone during daylight hours, tending to ranch business, but evenings were spent in the main room where he would read aloud from one of his books while Rosa mended and Lillian knitted. A week into her stay, Lillian was sitting on the porch, breathing in the crisp autumn air when Thomas approached from the barn. He carried what looked like a small wooden box. "Afternoon, Miss James," he greeted, removing his hat, feeling up to a short walk. Curious, she nodded, and he offered his arm for support. They strolled slowly toward a small rise behind the house, where a lone oak tree stood sentinel. "I wanted to give you this," Thomas said, presenting the box. "Made it myself." Lillian opened it to find a beautifully carved wooden frame containing a simple sketch of her brother's face. "How?" she breathed, running her fingers over the glass. "You described him so clearly the other night," Thomas explained. "I used to sketch quite a bit before." He trailed off. "Anyway, I thought you might want something to remember him by." Tears blurred her vision. The likeness wasn't perfect, but it captured James's kind eyes and the quirk of his smile. It was the most thoughtful gift she'd ever received. "Thank you," she whispered, clutching the frame to her chest. "This means more than I can say." Thomas nodded, seemingly embarrassed by her emotion. "It's nothing much," but it wasn't nothing, and they both knew it. In that moment, something shifted between them, the beginnings of a bond formed through shared understanding of loss. As autumn deepened toward winter, Lillian became increasingly integrated into life at the Lazy Tea. Rosa taught her to make tortillas and spicy stews, laughing at Lillian's early failures and celebrating her successes. Miguel, Rosa's husband and Thomas's foreman, showed her how to identify the ranch's cattle by their markings and explain the complexities of ranch operations. The ranch hands Hank, an older man with a perpetual squint, and Charlie, barely 20 and eager to please, treated her with a mixture of shy respect and brotherly protectiveness. Both had been with Thomas since he started the ranch and spoke of him with obvious admiration. "Boss saved my life," Hank told her one evening as they sat shelling peas on the porch. "Found me dead drunk in a ditch in Virginia City after I lost everything at the tables, sobered me up and gave me honest work when nobody else would touch me." Charlie nodded agreement. "He gave me a chance when I was just a scrawny kid caught stealing apples from his wagon in town. Could have had me jailed, but took me on instead. Said everybody deserves a second chance." These stories painted a picture of Thomas that intrigued Lillian further. He was often quiet, sometimes distant, but his actions revealed a deep well of compassion. She began to watch him more closely, the way his eyes crinkled when he smiled, the gentleness with which he handled newborn calves, the respect he showed to every person regardless of station. One evening in early December, snow began falling in thick, silent flakes. Thomas came in from the barn, stomping his boots and rubbing his hands together for warmth. "Storm's moving in faster than expected," he announced. "Might be a bad one." Rosa clicked her tongue. "The wood supply for the house is low. Miguel mentioned it this morning." "I'll take care of it," Thomas said, reaching for his coat again. "I'll help," Lillian offered, setting aside her mending. Thomas looked ready to refuse, but something in her expression must have changed his mind. "Dress warm," was all he said. Minutes later, they trudged through the thickening snow toward the woodpile near the barn. Thomas loaded logs into Lillian's arms, then filled his own with a much larger stack. "You've adapted well here," he commented as they walked back. "Wouldn't have thought a city girl would take to ranch life so easily," Lillian laughed. "St. Louis isn't exactly a metropolis and we weren't wealthy. I've always worked hard." She paused. "Besides, it's easy to work for people who treat you with kindness." Thomas glanced at her sideways. "You planning to stay through winter then?" The question carried more weight than its casual delivery suggested. Lillian had been avoiding thinking too far ahead, finding unexpected comfort in the present. "If that's still acceptable to you," she replied carefully. Thomas stopped walking, turning to face her fully, snowflakes caught in his beard and eyelashes, making him look younger somehow. "It's more than acceptable, Lillian," he said quietly, using her given name for the first time. "It's welcome." Something in his tone made her heart flutter strangely. Before she could respond, a gust of wind blew a shower of snow from a nearby tree branch, covering them both. Thomas's startled laugh broke the tension, and they hurried back to the warmth of the house. That night, lying in bed listening to the wind howl outside, Lillian realized with a start that she no longer thought constantly of leaving. Somehow, without her noticing, this place had begun to feel like home. The blizzard lasted 3 days, burying the ranch in deep snow. Confined indoors, the household found ways to pass the time. Miguel taught Lillian to play chess, Rosa shared family recipes, and Thomas revealed a talent for storytelling that kept everyone entertained through the long evenings. On the 4th morning, the sun emerged brilliantly. Thomas and the men went out to check on the cattle, leaving Lillian and Rosa to tackle the accumulated housework. "You care for him," Rosa stated matter-of-factly as they kneaded bread dough side by side. Lillian's hands faltered. "Thomas has been very kind to me," Rosa gave her a knowing look. "That is not what I meant, and you know it." Heat rose in Lillian's cheeks. "Even if I did, it wouldn't be appropriate. I'm dependent on his charity." "Bah," Rosa waved a flowery hand. "You work as hard as anyone here, and I have seen how he watches you when he thinks no one notices." "Rosa, please," Lillian protested weakly, but the older woman's words had planted a seed of hope she hadn't allowed herself to acknowledge. "He has been alone too long," Rosa continued, her voice softening. "Catherine was a good woman, but she is gone. The living must go on living." Before Lillian could respond, the back door burst open and Hank rushed in. "Boss is hurt," he announced grimly. "Steer spooked and knocked him off his horse into a ravine. Charlie and Miguel are bringing him in now." Lillian's heart seemed to stop. "How bad?" "Bad enough," Hank said. He was conscious, but his legs busted for sure. The next hour passed in a blur of activity. Thomas was carried in, face gray with pain, his right leg clearly broken. The nearest doctor was in Carson City, 2 days' ride away in good weather, and impossible to reach now with the roads snowed in. "I can set it," Miguel said quietly. "I have done it before." Thomas nodded tightly. "Do it." Rosa prepared a tonic of whiskey and herbs while Lillian gathered clean cloths and water. Miguel examined the break carefully. "Clean break, at least," he announced. "Lillian, you will need to help hold him down." It was the most difficult thing Lillian had ever done, pressing her weight against Thomas's shoulders as Miguel manipulated the bone back into place. Thomas's jaw clenched so hard she feared his teeth would crack. But he didn't cry out, only a harsh grunt escaping when the bones snapped back into alignment. Afterward, as Miguel fashioned a splint, Lillian wiped the sweat from Thomas's brow with a cool cloth. "Still glad you decided to stay for winter?" he asked, attempting a weak smile despite his pallor. "Hush," she scolded gently. "Save your strength." The following weeks reversed their roles completely. Now it was Thomas who was confined to bed and Lillian who cared for him. She read to him from his favorite books, helped him with correspondence related to ranch business, and changed his bandages daily. For a man accustomed to constant activity, the confinement was clearly torturous. Thomas grew restless and occasionally short-tempered, though he always apologized immediately. "I'm sorry," he said after snapping at her one afternoon when she insisted he rest rather than attempt to review cattle tallies. "You've been nothing but kind, and I'm behaving like a bear with a sore head." "You're forgiven," Lillian said, smoothing his blanket. "I can only imagine how frustrating this is for you." Thomas caught her hand, surprising them both. "You're extraordinary, Lillian James, do you know that?" His touch sent warmth spreading through her. "Hardly extraordinary, just doing what needs doing." "No," he insisted, his blue eyes intent on hers. "It's more than that. You lost everything, yet you've rebuilt a life here with such grace. You never complain, never speak of what you've lost. Instead, you find ways to add joy to everyone around you." Lillian swallowed hard. "I've had good examples to follow." His thumb traced small circles on the back of her hand. "I find myself wondering what I did before you arrived." The air between them seemed to thicken with unspoken feelings. Lillian's heart thundered in her chest as Thomas slowly raised her hand to his lips, placing a gentle kiss on her knuckles. Perhaps this broken leg is a blessing in disguise, he murmured. It's given me time to realize what's truly important. A knock at the door broke the moment. Charlie entered with firewood, oblivious to the tension he'd interrupted. Lillian withdrew her hand and busied herself straightening items on the bedside table, her cheeks burning. That night, she lay awake long into the small hours, replaying Thomas's words and the feel of his lips against her skin. Was she foolish to hope, or more foolish to deny the feelings growing within her? By February, Thomas was moving about with the aid of crutches, his mood improving with his increased mobility. The worst of winter had passed, though snow still blanketed the landscape. Ranch activities continued at a slower pace, with Miguel taking on more responsibility in Thomas's absence from daily operations. One crisp, clear morning, Thomas found Lillian in the kitchen, preparing dough for the week's bread. "Would you accompany me for a short walk?" he asked. "Doc Wilson is coming from Carson City next week, and I'm hoping to be rid of these contraptions by then, but I should probably strengthen my leg before he arrives." "Of course," Lillian agreed, wiping flour from her hands. "Let me just finish this." They bundled up against the cold and set out along a path the ranch hands had kept clear. Thomas moved slowly but steadily, his strength clearly returning. "I've been thinking about spring," he said as they reached a small bench overlooking the valley. "About what happens when the road's clear." Lillian's stomach tightened. Despite Rosa's assurances and Thomas's growing attentiveness, she had avoided thinking too concretely about the future. "Oh," she managed, keeping her tone light. Thomas lowered himself onto the bench, setting his crutches aside. "Yes." "Specifically about whether you still plan to continue to Placerville." Lillian remained standing, suddenly needing the distance. I haven't decided, I see." Thomas looked down at his hands. "Because I was hoping you might consider staying permanently." Her heart skipped. "As what exactly?" Thomas met her gaze directly. "As my wife, Lillian." The words hung in the crystal air between them. Lillian felt dizzy with conflicting emotions: joy, disbelief, fear. "I know it seems sudden," Thomas continued when she didn't respond, "and perhaps it is. But these months with you have been the happiest I've known in years. You've brought light back into my home, my life." He reached for her hand. "I'm not offering charity or convenience. I'm offering my heart if you'll have it." Tears pricked Lillian's eyes. "Thomas, you don't need to answer now," he interrupted gently. "Take time to think. This isn't a decision to make lightly." But Lillian already knew her answer. The hesitation came not from doubt about her feelings, but from fear of their intensity. "I don't need time," she said softly. "I've known for weeks that I love you." Thomas's face transformed with such hope that it nearly broke her heart. "Then, yes," she whispered. "Yes, I'll marry you." He pulled her down beside him on the bench and kissed her a tender, reverent kiss that promised a lifetime of care. Lillian melted into it, feeling as though her heart might burst from happiness. When they finally parted, Thomas pressed his forehead to hers. "I thought I'd never feel this way again," he confessed. "After Catherine died, I closed that part of myself off. Then you appeared, half dead, beside that broken wagon, and something in me recognized you immediately." "Recognized me?" Lillian asked. "As someone who would matter," Thomas explained. "I just didn't know then how much." They sat together as the winter sun climbed higher, making plans and sharing dreams. Thomas spoke of expanding the ranch, of building a proper schoolhouse for the children of neighboring farms. Lillian shared her hope of starting a small library, of perhaps teaching during winter months when ranch work slowed. "We should wait until spring to marry," Thomas suggested as they walked back to the house. "Give you a proper wedding, not some rushed affair." Lillian nodded agreement, though part of her wanted nothing more than to be his wife immediately. "Rosa will need time to prepare anyway. I suspect she'll take charge of the entire affair." Thomas laughed. "No doubt, and she'll be insufferably pleased with herself for predicting this outcome." "You knew she was matchmaking?" Lillian asked, surprised. "Rosa has about as much subtlety as a stampeding buffalo," Thomas replied with a grin. "But in this case, I can't fault her methods." Their announcement at dinner that evening was met with enthusiastic approval. Rosa wiped tears of joy while declaring she'd known all along. Miguel offered a dignified congratulations, though his eyes twinkled with satisfaction. Hank and Charlie whooped and pounded the table until Rosa threatened them with her wooden spoon. To the boss and his lady, Hank proposed, raising his coffee cup and toast. May your life together be long and happy. Hear, hear, the others echoed, and Lillian felt surrounded by more genuine family feeling than she'd known since her parents' passing. Later, as Thomas walked her to her bedroom door, propriety would be maintained until their wedding, they'd agreed. He kissed her once more, lingering and sweet. I'll never forget finding you by that wagon, he murmured against her lips. Best day of my life, though I didn't know it then. You said you'd mend more than wood, Lillian reminded him, touching his cheek. And you've mended my heart. Thomas smiled, the happiness in his eyes warming her to her toes. Sleep well, my almost wife, and you, my almost husband. Spring arrived with a rush of new life, calves being born, wildflowers dotting the meadows, fruit trees bursting into fragrant bloom. As the snow melted and the roads cleared, preparations for the wedding intensified. Rosa took charge of the food, ordering supplies from Carson City and enlisting help from wives of neighboring ranchers. Miguel and the hands constructed tables and benches for the guests, while Thomas built a wedding arch under the oak tree where he'd once given Lillian the drawing of her brother. 2 weeks before the wedding, an unexpected wagon arrived at the ranch. A tall man with a shock of white hair and spectacles introduced himself as Judge Frederick Parker from Carson City. I understand congratulations are in order, he said, pumping Thomas's hand. Got your message about the wedding license. Thought I'd bring it personally along with a gift. From the wagon, he produced a beautiful wooden chest. This belonged to my late wife. She'd want a bride to have it for keeping special things, memories. Touched by the gesture, Lillian embraced the old judge impulsively. It's lovely. Thank you. Judge Parker stayed for dinner, regaling them with stories of early Nevada Territory days. Known Thomas since he first came out here, just a green boy with big dreams and no idea what he was getting into, he chuckled. Watched him build this place from nothing. He's a good man, Miss James. You chose well. I believe we chose each other, Lillian replied, smiling across the table at Thomas. The judge nodded approvingly. Best kind of match. The wedding day dawned clear and perfect, with a sky so blue it seemed painted. Lillian woke early, a mixture of excitement and serenity filling her. Rosa helped her dress in the new gown they'd sewn together, cream-colored cotton with delicate embroidery at the neckline and cuffs. Something borrowed, Rosa said, pinning a cameo brooch to Lillian's bodice. It was my mother's. It's beautiful, Lillian murmured, touching it reverently. And something new, Rosa continued, presenting a small package. Inside was a pair of delicate earrings, silver with tiny pearl drops. Thomas had them made in Carson City, Rosa explained. Miguel picked them up last week. Lillian's eyes filled with tears. They're perfect. By noon, guests had begun arriving, neighboring ranchers and their families, shopkeepers from the small town 20 miles away, even a few travelers passing through who'd been invited to share in the celebration. 50 people in all gathered around the oak tree where Judge Parker waited with Thomas. Lillian's breath caught when she saw Thomas standing there. He wore a new black suit, his hair neatly combed, his face freshly shaved. But it was his expression that moved her most, the naked hope and love in his eyes when he spotted her walking toward him on Miguel's arm. The ceremony itself was simple but deeply meaningful. They exchanged vows they'd written themselves, promising to support and cherish each other through whatever life might bring. When the judge pronounced them husband and wife, Thomas kissed her with such tender passion that several of the women guests dabbed at their eyes. The celebration lasted well into the night. There was feasting and dancing, music provided by a fiddler from town and one of the neighboring ranchers who played concertina. Children ran about with streamers, dogs darted between the tables hoping for scraps, and laughter flowed as freely as the wine. As sunset painted the sky in shades of gold and pink, Thomas led Lillian away from the festivities to a quiet spot overlooking the valley. Happy Mrs. O'Malley? He asked, his arm around her waist. The new name sent a thrill through her. Completely, she assured him, leaning into his embrace. And you, more than I ever thought possible. He turned her to face him. I have something for you. From his pocket he withdrew a small leather pouch. Inside was a gold ring set with a single perfect pearl. My wedding gift, he explained, sliding it onto her finger above her simple gold band. I wanted to wait until we were alone. It's exquisite, Lillian breathed, admiring how it caught the fading light. Like its wearer, Thomas murmured, kissing her again. They stood together as twilight deepened, watching the first stars appear. Below them, the lights of their home glowed warm and inviting, the sounds of celebration drifting up on the evening breeze. "It's strange," Lillian said thoughtfully. "6 months ago, I thought my life was over. Now I can't imagine it being more full." Thomas tightened his arm around her. "Life has a way of surprising us, sometimes terribly, sometimes wonderfully." He pressed a kiss to her temple. "I'm grateful every day that I found you, even in such tragic circumstances." As they walked back to join their guests, hand in hand, Lillian felt a profound sense of rightness. The road that had brought her here had been painful, marked by loss and uncertainty. Yet somehow it had led exactly where she was meant to be. The years that followed were rich with both joy and challenge. Their first spring as husband and wife brought unprecedented rainfall, swelling the creek that ran through the property into a raging torrent that swept away part of the east pasture fence and several calves. Thomas and the hands worked day and night to save what they could, while Lillian kept the household running and prepared endless meals for exhausted men. Summer brought better fortune. The lazy Titikes cattle fetched excellent prices at market, allowing Thomas to purchase additional acreage from a neighboring ranch whose owner was returning east. With the expanded property came increased responsibilities, but also opportunities. Lillian suggested converting an unused storage building into a small schoolhouse, and by fall, she was teaching 8 children the ranch hands youngsters and those from 2 nearby homesteads. Their first Christmas as a married couple was a time of special celebration. Thomas surprised Lillian with a small piano, transported at great expense from Sacramento. Though rusty from years without practice, she soon filled their evenings with music. In return, she gifted him with news that left him speechless with joy. By summer, they would welcome a child. The announcement transformed Thomas. He threw himself into preparing for the baby's arrival, building a cradle and a rocking chair, expanding their bedroom to accommodate a nursery area, even carving tiny wooden animals as toys. His enthusiasm was infectious, though sometimes Lillian had to gently remind him that they had months yet to prepare. "Can't help it," he told her one evening as they sat by the fire, his hand resting protectively over her still flat stomach. "Never thought I'd have this chance again." Lillian covered his hand with hers. "Are you afraid?" she asked softly, knowing the loss of his first wife and child still haunted him. Thomas was quiet for a long moment. "Yes," he admitted finally, "but not enough to dim my happiness. Life comes with no guarantees, Lillian, we both know that. All we can do is love fully while we have the chance." As Lillian's pregnancy progressed, Rosa became her constant companion and guide. The older woman shared wisdom from her own 5 pregnancies, helped prepare the household for the baby's arrival, and fiercely protected Lillian from overexertion despite her protests. "The ranch will survive if you rest," Rosa insisted when Lillian tried to continue her usual activities. "That baby needs you healthy." July brought scorching heat and Lillian's confinement. The birth was difficult and prolonged, lasting through a sweltering night and into the following day. Thomas paced outside their bedroom, driven nearly mad by Lillian's muffled cries and Rosa's refusal to let him enter. "Men only get in the way," she told him firmly. "Go check the herd or chop wood, something useful." When Rosa finally opened the door, her face creased with exhaustion but beaming, Thomas nearly collapsed with relief. "You have a son," she announced, ushering him inside, "strong and perfect like his mother." The sight that greeted him would remain etched in Thomas's memory forever. Lillian, pale but radiant, holding a tiny bundle with a shock of dark hair. She looked up at him with tired eyes full of love. "Meet your son," she whispered. "James Thomas O'Malley." Thomas approached almost reverently, sitting carefully beside them on the bed. When Lillian placed the baby in his arms, his hands trembled. "Hello, little man," he murmured, a tear tracking down his cheek. "Welcome to the world." Little James thrived, growing quickly into a sturdy, curious toddler with his father's blue eyes and his mother's determined spirit. He became the center of the household, adored by all, but especially by his parents, who marveled daily at the miracle of his existence. The ranch prospered as well. Thomas's careful management and willingness to embrace new techniques resulted in steadily increasing profits. Lillian's small school grew to 15 students, necessitating the construction of a proper schoolhouse. She hired a young woman from Carson City to assist with teaching, allowing her to balance her educational duties with motherhood and ranch responsibilities. When James was 2, a letter arrived that disrupted their peaceful existence. It was from a law firm in St. Louis, informing Lillian that a distant cousin had died, leaving her a modest inheritance, primarily books and personal effects, but also a small sum of money. "We should go," Thomas said after reading the letter. "It's your heritage, Lillian. James should know something of his mother's family." The journey east was Lillian's first trip away from the Lazy T since her arrival. She found it both strange and nostalgic to return to St. Louis, now so different from the city she remembered. They stayed for 3 weeks, settling the legal matters and visiting places from Lillian's childhood. She took Thomas to her parents' graves, introducing him and little James in quiet conversation with those long departed. The most meaningful discovery came among her cousins, effects a family Bible containing records dating back 3 generations, and a collection of letters written by Lillian's grandmother during the early settlement of Missouri. These tangible connections to her past were more valuable to Lillian than the monetary inheritance. "I didn't realize how much I'd forgotten," she told Thomas as they packed these treasures for the journey home, "or how much I never knew." Thomas squeezed her hand, understanding. "That's why we came, so you and James would have these pieces of your history." The return to Nevada felt like coming home in a way Lillian hadn't anticipated. As the familiar landscape came into view, she felt a profound sense of belonging that had nothing to do with birthplace and everything to do with the life she and Thomas had built together. Their 5th wedding anniversary coincided with news of a second pregnancy. This time, Thomas was both joyful and terrified, having witnessed the difficulty of James's birth, but Lillian approached it with calm confidence. "Different baby, different birth," Rosa assured them both. "Each one writes its own story." True to her word, their daughter arrived with surprising ease in February 1882 after just a few hours of labor. They named her Elizabeth Rose, though she quickly became Lizzie to everyone at the ranch. Where James was thoughtful and methodical like his father, Lizzie was a whirlwind from the start, curious, determined, and fearless. By the time she could walk, she was everywhere at once, keeping the entire household on constant alert. "She's going to give us gray hair before she's 5, Thomas predicted as they watched 3-year-old Lizzie attempting to climb onto one of the corral fences. Lillian laughed, shifting their newest addition, 6-month-old Samuel, in her arms. "Between her and the boys, we'll be lucky if we have any hair left at all." Life settled into a rhythm shaped by the seasons, the children's growth, and the expanding ranch operations. Thomas purchased additional land when possible, eventually making the Lazy T one of the most substantial cattle operations in the region. Lillian's school became officially recognized by the territorial government, securing funding for a second teacher and proper supplies. They faced hardships, of course. The winter of 1885 was brutally cold, killing nearly a third of their cattle despite heroic efforts to save them. A fire in 1887 destroyed one of the barns and threatened the main house before a fortunate shift in wind spared them. In 1889, 5-year-old Samuel contracted scarlet fever, hovering between life and death for nearly 2 weeks before finally turning the corner toward recovery. Through it all, Thomas and Lillian's partnership remained unshakable. They disagreed at times. Thomas occasionally found Lillian's progressive educational ideas challenging, while she sometimes chafed at his protective instincts. But they faced every challenge as a united front, their commitment to each other deepening with each passing year. By their 10th anniversary, the original ranch house had been expanded twice to accommodate their growing family and increasing prosperity. A proper library housed Lillian's growing book collection, and a piano room had been added where all 3 children took lessons from their mother. To celebrate the milestone, Thomas arranged a surprise trip to San Francisco, their first real vacation since their marriage. For 2 glorious weeks, they attended the theater, dined in fine restaurants, walked along the bay, and slept late in a luxury hotel, glorying in the novelty of having no responsibilities beyond enjoying each other's company. "I've been saving for this for 3 years," Thomas confessed as they sat in a restaurant far more elegant than anything available in Nevada. "You deserve beautiful things, Lillian. Sometimes I worry that ranch life has denied you too much." Lillian reached across the table to take his hand. "I have everything I could possibly want," she assured him. "The ranch isn't a deprivation, Thomas. It's the life I chose, the life I love." "Still," he insisted, "it's nice to see you in silk instead of calico for a change," she laughed, squeezing his fingers. "I won't deny enjoying this dress. Or the hot baths, or sleeping past dawn, but I wouldn't trade our everyday life for all the silk in China." The years continued their relentless march. James, at 15, became his father's right hand in ranch operations, showing a natural aptitude for the business side of cattle ranching. Lizzie, now 13, was equally capable but more drawn to academic pursuits, devouring books from Lillian's library and corresponding with a cousin in St. Louis who attended university. Samuel, at 10, was still finding his path, though he showed remarkable talent with horses, a natural seat, according to Miguel, who had become the boy's mentor in all things equestrian. A fourth child, Margaret, born when Lillian was 38, completed their family, a quiet, watchful 7-year-old who seemed to absorb everything around her. As Nevada achieved statehood and the 19th century gave way to the 20th, the landscape of their lives evolved. The railroad came within 20 miles of the ranch, making travel and shipping dramatically easier. Telegraph lines connected them to the wider world, bringing news more quickly than the weekly newspaper ever could. Carson City grew from a territorial outpost to a proper capital, offering amenities they once had to travel to San Francisco to enjoy. Through these changes, the heart of the Lazy T remained constant, the family Thomas and Lillian had created, bound by love and mutual respect, weathering whatever challenges arose with the resilience they'd cultivated over decades together. In 1912, 36 years after Thomas found Lillian beside that broken wagon, they celebrated their 35th wedding anniversary surrounded by children, grandchildren, and friends from across the state. The Lazy T had grown to over 10,000 acres, with operations now overseen primarily by James and his youngest brother Samuel, allowing Thomas, at 70, to step back into an advisory role. Lillian, at 58, had long since handed over the school to younger teachers, though she still served on the county education board. Her library had expanded to fill a dedicated building on the ranch property, open to anyone in the community who wished to borrow books. She'd recently begun compiling a history of the region, collecting stories from old-timers before they were lost forever. After the anniversary celebration, a weekend-long affair that taxed even the ranch's expanded facilities, Thomas and Lillian retreated to the porch of their home, watching the sunset as they had countless times before. Gray now threaded Thomas's once dark hair, and lines of experience mapped both their faces, but the connection between them remained as vibrant as ever. 35 years, Thomas mused, his hand covering hers on the arm of the rocking chair. Seems like yesterday and forever all at once. Lillian nodded, understanding perfectly. "Do you remember what you said to me that first day by the wagon?" Thomas smiled. "I believe I made some grandiose promise about mending more than wood." "Not so grandiose as it turned out," Lillian said softly. "You mended my life, Thomas. You gave me a home when I had none, love when I thought I'd lost everything worth loving." "We mended each other," Thomas corrected gently. "You brought life back to this place, back to me when I thought that part of my existence was over." They sat in comfortable silence as the last light faded from the sky, each reflecting on the journey that had brought them to this moment, from a broken wagon on a dusty trail to a legacy that would endure long after they were gone. No regrets. Thomas asked finally, a question he'd posed on every anniversary since their first. Lillian turned to him, her eyes reflecting the first evening stars. "None," she answered, as she always did. "Not a single one." As night settled over the Lazy T, their hands remained intertwined, a testament to a love that had begun in the unlikeliest circumstances and grown into something neither could have imagined on that fateful day in 1876. What had started with a broken wagon had become a life built on promises kept, challenges overcome, and a love that had only deepened with the passing years. In the distance, a coyote called to its mate, and somewhere in the ranch house, a grandchild's laughter rang out. Thomas and Lillian sat together in the gathering darkness, surrounded by the fruits of their shared life. Two halves of a whole that had weathered time and trial to create something truly extraordinary, a love story written across decades, beginning with 6 simple words spoken beside a broken wagon. "I'll mend more than wood." And so he had.